All right, after the nitrogen test, I put it on the vacuum in the last video. It has been coming up on 11 minutes. We're down to 320 some microns, but that's with the vacuum pump on. Now, if you remember from video number 1, I left Redwood City, drove to San Francisco. That was roughly like 27 minutes or something like that, 20 minutes for me to get here. And when we turned on my refrigerant gauges, I think it was 770 microns or something like that. It was still holding a vacuum from the last job I was on. So we know we cannot possibly hold a vacuum decay test lower than 770 microns, because just the contamination in my rubber refrigerant hoses, that from my hoses, will not allow it to go below 770 microns once you turn off the vacuum. So you know, anything there lower, even if the system was sealed and dry and capable of holding down to say 200 or 300 microns, it wouldn't, because the sensor is located here in the refrigerant manifold, and it's reading the little film of refrigerant oil, contaminated refrigerant oil, old rubber hoses that had refrigerant in it and moisture and refrigerant oil from other cars. So that is a contaminant, and it affects the reading. So we know when I turn off this vacuum, usually it's not possible to hold lower on the vacuum decay test than that 770 I started with. So let's find out. We're dipping in below 300. We could see we're just past 12 minutes. I just want to show you right now where we are. That's where we started. Wait, I could never figure that out. But remember, we started at above 1,000 microns when I turned on the software. So let's turn off the vacuum and let's see what we read. It'll go above 700 instantly. There we go. Now it'll stabilize. It might go up and it might go back down. Let's see what happens. We could see the jump, the peak right here up on the graph. When I turned it off right there, it jumped right up. Now remember, this thing has been open for weeks, if not months, to the atmosphere. And unfortunately, that refrigerant oil that's in that system has been exposed to the atmosphere. So the surface layer of the oil absorbs the moisture out of the system, because the dry refrigerant oil that came packed in this compressor is a desiccant itself. It's an absorbent material. It's hygroscopic. It loves moisture. Even though it was dry when it was put in there, as soon as you hooked it up to your wet system, the oil started pulling moisture out of the air, and the moisture was traveling and going deep down inside the oil, saturating the oil in that whole compressor, contaminating it, because it was left open to the atmosphere. And the micron meter will tell you that. Now remember, we're 1,700. Well, basically we know 700 was 770 is the limitation of using hoses. To do this correctly, you would not have no hoses except for drawing the vacuum. You would have a separate micron meter hooked up on another fitting somewhere, or on an isolation valve where you can isolate the micron meter right here through some valves right here and turn off the hoses and not be measuring the hoses. You would only measure the system. And you would find out that that oil is saturated with moisture, because here we go, we got 1,700 microns. I could put it on here another hour, turn it off, and it'll probably jump right back to 1,700 microns, because there's, I think, like 5 or 6 ounces of oil that is thick and it's all saturated. And there's no way for me to get all the moisture out of that oil from being exposed to the atmosphere. So what will happen is I put it on for an hour, I turn it off, it goes back to 1,700. Maybe I dry out the surface so I get down to 1,400 or 1,500, but if you let it sit, it'll go back to 1,700. Then you'd vacuum it again and it'll go back to 1,700. You're basically never going to get that out. The only way to do that would be drain all the oil out of the compressor and put brand new fresh oil back in. But maybe if I left this on for 48 hours, I might be able to get this down to about 700 or 800 microns, but I can't get below what the hoses are. But if I was isolating on the hoses, then I might be able to get a little lower. But anytime a technician leaves the system open to the atmosphere, they destroy the oil. They completely saturate it, and a vacuum pump will not get it all out. You can reduce the level of moisture in the system, but you can't get it all out with a vacuum pump. Remember, you got a thick layer column of oil in that vacuum pump. And so we're stabling out, and that's where we're staying. I already ate a half a sandwich. I'll eat the other half. I know there's nothing I can do for the system, drying it out wise, because I know how long it was left open to the atmosphere. And me leaving it on here for 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours is not going to do anything. It was already grossly contaminated. And this is what guys in the shops, you guys have to understand. You do not leave the systems open to the atmosphere at all whatsoever. You always use nitrogen to flush them off while you're working on them and doing anything. You always keep them positive pressure. You always use rubber caps and plugs to plug up the systems. Otherwise, you get situations where I can actually read the moisture level. All right, guys, I'll see you. I got to answer a call and put this back on the vacuum pump.